Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 59 of the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre, and in this episode, I have a great conversation with Sara Rider. Sara Rider writes contemporary romances full of heart and heat about strong women and the men who can't resist them. Growing up, she dreamed of becoming a professional soccer player, but when that dream was squashed by her extreme dislike of running, she decided to do the next best thing, write about professional soccer players. Sara and I talk about this series of novels as well as a series of novels related to books and beer, two things I'm very passionate about. And we'll get to that interview in a moment. But first, a bit of a personal update. I just finished reading a great book by James Fell called The Holy Shit Moment. Of course, the book is spelled with an exclamation point instead of an I, because that's still a naughty word. The subtitle is How Lasting Change Can Happen in an Instant. Now, while I know this is a book about life-changing events, I kept reading it and I kept keeping it in mind from the point of view of an author looking for that lightning flash of, that's it, when working on a piece of writing. You know, when you're gnawing at different ideas from the plot. Because the way that Fell describes this type of thing and how inspiration or enlightenment can seem to strike out of the blue is usually the way an idea or a spark for something in my writing happens when I'm noodling over an element from a novel, but actually not focusing on it at the time. So like Fell suggests, it's often going out and taking a walk or doing some sort of physical activity, usually outdoors, that can be one of those magic ingredients for that lightning strike of finding inspiration. And as you'll see in the forthcoming interview with Sara, sometimes a book or an important element of a book can pop into a writer's head almost completely fully formed. In any case, I loved this book, The Holy Shit Moment. It was a compelling and inspiring read. And I'm going to be interviewing James for a forthcoming episode of this podcast. Now, I also listened to the audio version of the book, and the author, James, narrated his own book, and his narrating style perfectly matches the style of the prose of the book, which is almost like a conversation where you're just sitting across the table and he's sharing the tales with you from the book. Speaking of great narrators, now is the great time to mention this episode's sponsor, Findaway Voices. Now, the book I was talking about was produced by Macmillan, one of the world's largest publishers, and I'll probably be asking James a little bit about where and how he recorded it for Macmillan and how that worked out, because I'm kind of curious about how that would be done. But in my own quest to get the audiobook version of the 7 Ps of Publishing Success finished, this week I recorded, I think it was 3 more chapters that were left from the book. And now all I have to do is the final closing credits recording, and then edit and clean up the audio files. And then I can actually upload the remaining files to Findaway Voices. And once I get that done, they'll quality check the files to ensure that they are actually good to go and professional level quality that can be pushed out to their global retail and library channel market. And once approved, then I can go set the price and choose my distribution, which I'll talk about in a future episode. But if you want to learn how you can work with Findaway Voices as an author, go ahead and check out starkreflections.ca/Findaway. In other personal news, I'm going to be heading off to Colorado Springs for Superstars Writing Seminars, where I'm going to be doing a 1-hour solo talk, as well as sitting on 10 different panels while I'm there. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm also going to be conducting 3 different hour-long sessions of one-on-one 15-minute appointments with authors interested in either learning more about draft to digital and how they can use draft to digital to get their works published globally, or anything else that I can share with them about the book industry, digital publishing, etc. Now, when I'm in town, my buddy Kevin J. Anderson and I will, of course, be popping out to enjoy one of the fine local breweries in Colorado Springs. And when Kevin and I first met years ago at ErieCon in Niagara Falls, New York, that's where he and his wife Rebecca Mista were guests of honor. We bonded over our mutual love of craft beer, of Halloween, and of the Canadian rock trio Rush. So whenever the two of us are together in the same city, Kevin and I always make a point of visiting local craft beer and just heading out for some conversation, either about writing, about beer, about Rush, and about all the other things that we have in common. Now, he's a big fan of hoppy IPAs, and he's told me that he's already scouted out a few local breweries that neither of us have been to. Last year, he took me to a great one. We went with his wife, Rebecca, and Dean Wesley Smith, and the four of us walked up to this amazing brewery that I'm going to have to visit again. Of course, the name of it eludes me right now, but I know where it is. I know how to walk to it from the hotel, and I'm sure I'm going to check that out one of the nights. And it'll be fun to discover this new brewery. And trust me, I've been to a lot of breweries in Colorado Springs, having visited that town more than half a dozen times in the past several years. Of course, somewhere between all of the things I'll be doing on stage and off stage, and on panels and off panels, and in appointments and off appointments, I'm going to be networking at Superstars writing seminars with some amazing writers, enjoying a combination of breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, be engaged in wonderful, inspiring, and insightful conversations, and many of which with some folks who've actually been guests on this podcast already, and probably folks who will be future guests on this podcast. And of course, while there, I plan on doing some Facebook Live videos of some brief chats like I did last year. You can find those on my Stark Publishing Facebook page, which I'll link to in the show notes at starkreflections.ca. I'll also later, of course, post some to my YouTube channel as well. And that's for those of you listeners who are inclined to watch short video clips. And I'm reminded of the attempt I made to do a short video about talking about the importance of exercise and how that can help you process things that you're learning at a conference. And of course, the Wi-Fi kept dropping out on me, and I had to restart that 3 times. So it was quite amusing to watch me suffer and fail like that. But I did put together a video where I kind of mocked myself and the Wi-Fi. Now, considering all of the special content that I'm going to be engaged in that happens at Superstars Writing Seminars, I'm likely also going to compile something special to offer to my Patreon supporters of the show. Now, to all patrons, I want to say thank you for your generosity in supporting the show. I appreciate your support, not just because of the financial boost that has helped me to upgrade the equipment and software used in making this show better, but it's the underlying emotional support that your patronage offers me. So when I get back from Superstars, I'm going to compile some extra content as a way to show my thanks for your wonderful support. And if you want to support the show, you can do so for as little as $1 a month and gain access to additional text, audio, visual, and video content at patreon.com/starkreflections. But that's enough for the intro and my personal updates. Let's get on to this great conversation with Sara. Hey, Sara, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, there's so many things for us to talk about, but I want to go back to the beginning of your writing career. And your biography states that your passion for soccer led to writing about pro soccer players. I'd love to hear more about that whole dynamic.
Sure. So I, in my youth, was a really big soccer player. I loved the sport, and I was always the girl who was playing with the boys, trying to prove to the boys that I could play with the boys. You know, I'm talking 20, 25 years ago, so it's different than it is now. And so when I started writing, I was first doing urban fantasy, kind of paranormal stuff, because that's what I was reading at the time. And then it kind of wasn't going where I wanted it to. So I thought, I'm going to try my hand at romance. I love romance novels. Sports romance was a really big thing at the time. This is about 2011 when I started writing it. Took a little longer for it to come out. But I thought, I'm going to write about my experiences and kind of put that into a book where, you've got women soccer players who are amazing in North America and throughout the world, really. but they're not the big name stars. They're not paid the same way. So there was a really interesting dynamic with sports romance where they're, I think we gravitate to that type of romance quite often because they're larger than life heroes with all this fame, but they also work really hard. So that bit of that kind of blue collar undertones that also appeals to a lot of readers. And I wanted to kind of flip that dynamic and see what it was like for a woman to be the best at her sport, have no recognition, and sort of have that enemies to lovers dynamic with a famous male soccer player, kind of both competing for attention. And so that was what the dynamic was. And it just brought a lot of my experiences, just always having to prove myself. And there's a lot of humor in there and a lot of fun experiences that came from that, I think. And I was able to kind of put that into the book. So it's also wish fulfillment because I ended up not playing professionally as I'd always dreamed, right? Just for all those reasons that I won't go into. So it was a lot of wish fulfillment, just really thinking about what the life would be like being, the best soccer player in the world and getting to play on a professional team. That wasn't really an option when I was 16. So it was a really nice, a little bit of wish fulfillment in there, but just a fun day.
Okay, cool. And as I understand it, your first few books were published by an imprint of pocketbooks. How did you go about finding them? How did they find you? How did that whole thing happen?
Traditionally, I was a slush kind of submission in my agent's inbox. She picked me up right away, and we had a pretty good run kind of submitting to editors. We had an editor who was interested. I had a great experience with that editor, and it was really the boring way. Just all the way through.
Okay, cool. And so speaking about, you have an agent, and the agent submitted this for you, and you got to deal with pocketbooks, which is amazing. Meaning, the book's distributed by one of the world's largest publishers.
Yeah.
But then you've also done some things yourself, and I'm curious about the reason why you decided to do that, and maybe the differences.
Sure. One of the things that I wanted to have a little bit more control over was the ability to give away free books and just sort of take advantage of that ad hoc kind of marketing opportunities. A lot of romance is on, sort of the following is on Twitter and also on Facebook. And so just jumping on those opportunities where authors are connecting and doing giveaways and that type of thing, it was really restrictive with a digital first line in a trad setting.
Right.
There's lots of benefits to that as well, but I want to just have books that I could just have complete control over. I just feel like having a sale this week for my birthday, so I'll put them on sale, that kind of thing. I couldn't do. So with this one, I discussed it with my agent. She was very supportive that I was going to do a series independently while we still have some things kind of simmering in the background, hopefully for some trad publishing, but just as a way to get my name out there a little more. It's a pretty competitive environment, as every writer knows. Just the chance to kind of get my book in front of new readers was really important to me, and then have a little bit more control over the covers. I was lucky, I liked my covers with Pocket Star, but I did want to have a different type of cover for this series, and I just wanted to see how it would go. So it's been really fun.
Okay, cool. And fun, and that is how I sort of discovered you. I think it was Real Kind of Love, which came out in June of 2018, as I understand it. And the premise of this just appealed to the craft beer nerd in me, and it looks like the making of an amazing movie. I mean, just the premise. Okay, so just so the readers, and let's see if I get this right. The main character is Clementine Cox, who is a audiobook narrator, and she is beginning to do erotica, which is probably a bit of humor in there, and she's not necessarily comfortable with that, so she books herself away to a remote cabin, but her family's overbearing, and she makes up a story that she's there with her lover, even though she's just there by herself. And that's sort of the beginning of the premise. I'm like, this sounds, and of course she ends up, Jake Donovan has a brew pub, and it's called the Holy Grail. And I mean, from that point, I'm already hooked with her story, but then you got a brew pub master, and okay, now we got to get into this. Where did this whole premise come from for this?
I don't really know. It was one of those stories that it's one of those rare stories that just popped into my head, almost fully formed. I was on mat leave at the time, and in Canada, we're lucky to get that full year, and I had a little bit more time to write than I normally do. And I had this really trope-driven idea. I love fake relationship stories. And so I wanted to write about Clementine's character is incredibly introverted, and that's really the crux of her personality and why she's trying to escape everything. And that's something I relate to very strongly. So I just wanted to have just a fun setup for it. It's a very, I hope, very funny book, very light. I call it fluffy, but with, fluffy to me is a positive term.
Yeah.
Deepest book that you can really, I hope, just kind of sink into. So it actually came fully formed into my head.
Really?
I like craft beer. I thought it'd be a fun setting because I think a lot of us introverts writers know that you're home all the time, never getting out. You sort of find your place somewhere. And for Clementine, it was this brew pub where they just let her work. They don't talk to her. They just kind of let her be around people, but not actually have to deal with people. And so that's something I related to as well. And I just kind of threw it all in, and it came out. It's just a book with a great plot that kind of wrote itself in some ways.
Well, that's fun. And so that was the first book. And then the second book, is that what connects the two in the Books and Brews series?
So there's two kind of streaming sort of that's the wrong word. Two storylines that kind of connect the two books together. So there is the brew pub owners. So the first book, it's really the owner of the brew pub, and the second's the brewmaster is the hero.
Okay.
But the other piece that connects the books is all the heroines are love romance novels, and that's a very connecting piece. So at the end of book one, they end up forming a Books and Brews club, which is a book club that's a bar. So it's just something that's been popping up, a phenomenon kind of all over the place. So the first book is a setup. The second one is somebody new joining that book club. And so those are kind of the two pieces that connect it together. And when I eventually write the third, it will be another worker at the brew pub. And so it'll be the woman who works at the brew pub and someone else who's connected to romance novels. So that's how it all kind of connects. In the second story, Make Me Fall, the heroine is a recent divorcee who moves to the town and is really struggling. She's in her 30s. She's struggling to make friends. She doesn't really have connections. And so she sort of finds her place in this book club, and it's a very opposites attract. She's the neighbor of the brewmaster, and they really don't get along. Their personalities are very different. So they're feuding. They're leaving hate notes in each other's mailboxes. And then she's got some terrible friends that she's made that aren't really a great fit for her. And they're kind of making fun of her for being too uptight to get a date. And he's sort of like, I'm her enemy. You don't get to be her enemy. So he kind of steps up and defends her and says, well, I'll date her. And that's sort of where it goes. He kind of brings her into the fold with a better book club. So.
Oh, this sounds amazing. So the Brews and Books book club sounds like if this is successful, you can continue to write more stories as different people interact in the group.
Yeah, people coming in and out of the group, which helps. I've got lots of ideas, and it'll just be about finding the time.
Yeah, of course. Now, that leads to an important question. So finding the time, even scheduling the interview was based on family, because you are working a full-time job and you have a family and you're a writer, 3 different hats right there, and 3 things that probably take full days. So how do you divide up the work time, the family time, and the writing time?
It's tough. It's the toughest thing I've tried to do is I think all of us parents have a little bit of guilt when we take on for ourselves. I have a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old. They're lovely. They're fun. My 6-year-old's just getting into books and writing herself now, which is great, but my 2-year-old is not quite so understanding. For me, I'm lucky that my day job is pretty 9 to 5. So I take my half-hour lunch break and I write. I take my 15-minute breaks and I write. If I can manage it, I get up early in the mornings at around 5 and try to write. But what always happens is that my kids have this telepathic knowledge that if I've gotten up at 5, they are somehow up at 5. It's been tough. It's been slow since having kids.
Right.
Definitely easier when I only had one kid. And I was able to, in Canada, we have a year-long mat leave. So I was able to do a little bit more writing because I was blessed that my second kid did sleep and did nap. I've got the Books and Brews series written, but I'm only just now getting back into the swing of writing very regularly and getting some more projects out there. So,
okay.
Yeah, that was another nice thing about self-publishing is that I didn't have the deadlines.
Okay. So yeah, that was a difference, right? You were able to, based on the family stuff could take priority. You didn't have to say, no, mommy can't do that. I've got a deadline. Okay.
Yeah, that was a challenge.
Do you find working with deadlines, with the difference between, you've got the contract to get the manuscript to the publisher on date X, and how do you impose a deadline to yourself when you're self-publishing?
I'm pretty deadline oriented, so I'm good that way. But I wrote and then I waited a very long time before I set a release date. I think it was about a year and a half between books coming out, just so that I would have enough time to get everything done, because I had to learn the whole landscape, like how to find an editor and a copy editor and cover, and just how to use Amazon and Draft Digital and Kobo. All these things was a big learning curve, and luckily I had lots of folks who are willing to help me out. But yeah, I gave myself a huge leeway because I didn't think I could do it under pressure.
Right.
And I still don't know that I can, because I was expecting to have my third book in the Books and Brews series out already, and I'm just starting to draft it now. So it's tough. With under contract, it was really just about discipline and saying, okay, for the next 5 months, because I was pregnant at the time that I was writing my third book. And there was a very strict timeline because basically the baby was coming and I had to get it done. So it kind of lined up nicely. Like the book was due at the same time the baby was due. So I had to really write every single spare minute of it. So that kind of imposed itself.
And you'd mentioned that you did do a lot of writing, on breaks. If you have 15 minutes, you use it, or half an hour. Are you writing longhand? Are you typing up on a computer, laptop? Are you dictating? How are you getting it done?
Longhand.
Okay.
I have an obsession with notebooks, as a lot of writers do, and I've mastered my growly face in the lunchroom, so that if anybody comes in and tries to sit with me, they see the go away face. And
Okay.
I had to basically tell my coworkers I'm a writer. It was a bit of an interesting thing to do. It was a new job at the time, and they're all very supportive, so they all get it. And then the other thing I do is I schedule my breaks into my Outlook calendar. And that's the best advice I've ever gotten as a writer with a full-time day job, is to actually set your calendar if you have an office Outlook, because people can't book you into meetings during those half-hour breaks and 15-minute breaks. And that way I force myself to not work through lunch and just actually take my break and write, because there's always that work guilt to push through lunch break and
Okay.
So, yeah, that's kind of how I do it.
So were any of the books in the Books and Brew series written while you're at a bar, while you're at a brewery, I should say?
Sadly, no. With kids,
No?
I don't get to the breweries as much as I would like.
with little people around, yeah, of course.
Yeah, but definitely I have my coffee shops that function in that way for me.
Okay. And what about the soccer ones? Were they written while you were in the stands, maybe even watching a junior game or something like that?
No, I actually my time watching my kids play is spent coaching. So
It's more active than passive.
Yeah. So the first in the sports books in the Perfect Play series, I was working from home at the time, so I was. It was really just kind of before 8 o'clock I was writing. I didn't have a kid at the time.
Right, and no commute, so you could use that time. Yeah.
So it was a lot easier to write that. It still took me a lot longer, but.
Now, you had mentioned early on that you enjoyed epic fantasy and different styles of writing, but you decided upon romance, and you explained the reasons. Are you ever tempted to go back and revisit some of the early writings, or work on books in different genres?
Yeah, I just spent the last year writing a straight fiction novel that I just had this idea for, with a slight paranormal twist, almost like a gothic novel. My agent liked the idea, so I just ran with it. But it ended up taking me almost a year and a half to write, and I don't know if it's going to go anywhere. I'm just finishing the proofing before I send it to the editor or to the agent for a yay or nay. But
okay,
I was at that point in my career where I really need to stretch my skills and just see what else I could do. And even if it goes nowhere, I've learned to write different timelines and just a different skill set. But I'm a lot more comfortable writing the romance beats. Like I feel like I know how it works for me. I know how my characters need to develop. I know how to structure the story. It's very intuitive for me. So
Okay.
yeah, but we'll see. I don't really know where my writing is going.
So you mentioned beats, and you also mentioned for a couple books that the entire story just came to you, and you had the whole thing formed in your head. Does that mean, do you actually outline or beat out the entire structure, or do you do any pantsing?
I don't know where I fit along the pantser plotter continuum, but what I say is I outline ugly and I write clean. So
Okay.
yeah, I'm not one of those fast drafters. I constantly write my outlines by hand in the notebook.
Okay.
Always revising my outline as I go. Sometimes I'll outline the next 3 scenes. I kind of just constantly outline. It's almost part of my iterative process, so it's changing. But I usually know my beats ahead of time,
Okay.
and I just try to make it work. However the character kind of dynamic goes, I'll shift it a little bit, and then yeah, I don't have a clean outline. It's always handwritten somewhere in my notes, and I got to look back and find it and then rewrite it. It's a messy process, but
Okay. And so it's been 8 years since you began the writing process and the journey and finding the agent, etc. If you could go back and tell your earlier self, your younger self, give yourself some advice, what advice would that be? Something that you've learned in the last 8 years?
for me, the biggest thing that I regret that I'd probably do differently is I didn't really invest in myself as a writer, even when my debut was coming out.
Okay.
I trying to feel confident feeling like a writer, and then I should celebrate those victories. And just getting rid of the imposter syndrome is still a challenge. Um, I didn't do a lot of extra promo, so my first book in the Perfect Play series, my debut came out right as I was having my baby. So I actually wasn't really invested in the promo the way I could have been. The book came out and I was in labor, so
You're a little bit busy. Yeah.
yeah, but you never get that chance again. And it's not just that; it's setting up. I don't think I had a website. I didn't have a newsletter. I didn't feel confident doing any of that stuff because I thought nobody knows me. Who cares, right? And people do care. That's what I've learned. They care about your writing, and they want to find you, and you have to make it easy for them, and you have to also celebrate every victory you can. Other than that, I would tell myself just to be more disciplined about waking up early in the mornings and set that habit a lot earlier. um, yeah, no, it's been a journey, but I've been pretty lucky in a lot of ways. So
Okay.
yeah.
And you have a newsletter for your fans, right? So you connect with them that way. Is there much crossover between the two different series?
I think so. I don't really know. I wasn't really with my newsletter the first time around. I'm not really sure. I really just started it with the second series because I realized I was missing out on a big opportunity.
Right.
So, I think in terms of the tone, they're very similar. I write fun, fluffy, escapist books. The humor's similar. The heat levels are similar. So I think there's a fair bit of crossover, but I find I'm always finding new ways to reach an audience, especially with social media, and it definitely changes that way. But I'm not as active with my newsletter as I should be. I still find that a bit of a nebulous process.
How often do you send it out?
Only when I have a new release or a sale.
Okay. Okay.
So maybe once or twice a year.
Okay, cool. And so the Books and Brews were your two latest books. So Real Kind of Love came out in the summer of 2018, and then the fall was Make Me Fall that came out in the fall, right? Is it right?
Yeah.
Excellent. And there's a third one that you're working on, as well as now you'd mentioned a contemporary fiction novel that's with your agent or soon to be with your agent.
Yeah. So I mean, that's my plan is to release the third sometime next year. I think it's going to be called Right Kind of Wrong. I'm still making the title, but it's about the sister of the brewmaster. So the sister of the hero in book one. She's sort of an event planner. She works for the brew pub in that capacity, and she falls for this very surly librarian that she's supposed to be working on an event with. And that's really the only sort of planned release I have. And I've got a few more proposals out there and things that are just kind of percolating, but nothing I can really talk about quite yet. Just a little bit.
Fair enough.
So I don't really, I don't know if I'm going to stick to romance entirely throughout my career, but if I do go away from that, it'll probably be under a pen name and
Right.
keep the two kind of streams a little separate.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you for sharing your backstory and all the interesting tidbits about your books with us. Can you please let my listeners know where they can find out more about you, find you online, etc.?
Sure. I have a website, which is sararider.com, SARARIDER.com. I always have to spell it out because people get both of my names wrong. I'm mostly on Twitter. Sara Rider 42 is where you can find me. I have a Facebook site, but that's probably not the best place to find me.
Okay.
And that's about it. I have an email, sararider.writer@gmail.com, and that's usually where I hear from folks. Most of the time I think I'm usually found on Twitter by most people.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sara.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this.
It was fun talking to Sara, and I have to say I'm really eager to check out her books and Brews novels. I've been reading more romance in the past several years and finding that I'm quite enjoying it. You might think that a horror writer like me might not be into that, but in the same way that the fear in horror is a universal element, so too is love. Douglas E. Winter said, "Horror is not a genre, it is an emotion." Similarly, love is like that. Love and romance are universal elements. Now, I enjoy a good romantic comedy, for example, so why wouldn't I enjoy the same thing in a novel? And novels like Sara's that combine people from the book industry and people from the beer industry, well, those are two of my favorite kinds of people. But that's me being excited about Sara's books. In terms of something that chatting with Sara inspired in me, I was thinking about how, when she was reflecting back on when her first novel was out, she talked about having recognized the fact that people want to find you, people want to like you. And I'm reminded of advice that my friend C.C. Humphreys, now you might remember him from episode 32, and what he said to remember when you're doing a book signing, because you can get nervous when you're in front of people. And he reminded us that the people in the audience are there to see you succeed. They're there to cheer you on. They're there to support you. They're with you. Your readers are the same way. They pick up a book wanting to love it, wanting to enjoy themselves, wanting to love you and what you've offered them. They're on your side. They're part of your tribe. It's easy to forget that in all of the angst and all of the blood and sweat and tears that goes not only into writing the book, but then into editing it and publishing it. Whether it's through slush piles and agents and submissions, or through finding professionals to work with and getting a self-published version of it out into the world, in either path, it's a tremendous amount of work. Now, after going through all that work, we can easily forget that we've created this story, this tale, with the intention of providing readers an escape for a few hours, some sort of inspiration perhaps, and an enjoyable ride to live in the worlds of our characters, to embrace and enjoy and be a part of their challenges, their goals, and their achievements. The readers want to fall into that world. They want to escape into it. They want to be a part of it. And when you sit back and you think about that, that's truly an amazing thing. It's a marvelous, incredible thing. We're so lucky that we get to be a part of that equation, that magic. And maybe after all the hard work you put into it, it's okay to pause for a moment to remember that. Well, that's it for episode 59 of the Stark Reflections podcast. Thanks for hanging out with me and with Sara today. I hope you found the talk with Sara inspiring and informative, and I hope you enjoyed the reflections. If you're enjoying the Stark Reflections podcast, you can do me a favor by sharing it with a friend that you think would benefit from it. That goes a really, really long way, and I appreciate that in advance. If you're inclined to leave a review, I'd love to get your feedback on the show. You can also reach out to me at Twitter @MarkLeslie or email me mark@markleslie.ca and give me some feedback for the show. There is also a ongoing survey about the podcast, so I can hear back from listeners to see what they like, what they don't like, so I can continue to make the show better. Thanks again for being part of the show. You are my family, and I appreciate having you in the same way that writers appreciate having readers. We're in this together after all. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Stark Reflections podcast. Until next week, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.